Welcome to the Eon Project with Mike and Jay. The following is a past episode of an early incarnation of the Eon Project. This was an interview Mike and Jay conducted with R. Gary Patterson. Mr. Patterson was a native Tennessean and a rock and roll historian. Recently, Mr. Patterson passed away. He will surely be missed, and our thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. This is our tribute to him. Rest in peace, sir, and always know the truth exists. Believe it. Live from the WNRI studios, perched high atop the banks of the majestic Peters River. Greetings from the jewel of the Blackstone Valley, Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Welcome to the darker side with Mike and Jay.
Welcome to everyone.
Yes, welcome. We have a special treat for you this evening, folks.
We do, and it's me. I'm here.
Well, you're here every week. You're just an everyday treat.
But I'm a special treat.
Oh, you're special.
My mom says I'm special.
Oh, you're sweet.
We had a great day today.
Yeah, we did. We had a great day.
We jointly went to a barbecue.
We had a barbecue slash birthday
birthday bash.
Birthday fiesta.
Lots of fun. Weather was great.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, we'd like to welcome any new guests tuning in, and of course, we thank our devoted listeners that tune in every week.
Who really wanted to know that we went to a birthday party today.
Well, they enjoy listening to extra special glimpses into our lives.
I think that they do. We feel they do.
I bet they think that we never separate. I bet that's what they think.
That's true almost.
Anyway, as you know, we only have 1 hour with you each week.
Only one.
And normally we go on with some small talk and a little banter and some bizarre news stories that we come across during the week. However, tonight we have a special guest joining us.
Yes.
So we're not going to do our typical banter. We want to get right into the interview because, of course, we only have an hour.
Time is short and time is valuable,
Time is short, so it's going to be very quick. So tonight we will be talking with R. Gary Patterson. And R. Gary Patterson is a native Tennessean with a passion for rock and roll.
Right.
As a published author with Simon & Schuster, Patterson's works portray many fascinating events that helped shape musical history. In 1996, Patterson released his first book entitled The Walrus's Paw, which actually I just read.
I just read it too. It's a great book.
And I have it here with me today.
Yes.
And
is that in case you get lost, you can hurry up and flip through the pages?
I can flip through. I'm hoping maybe I can mail it to him and he can sign it for me.
That would be great. Yeah.
That would be
good
cool.
idea.
But anyway, Gary also appeared on all the syndicated Beatle radio shows, including Westwood One's The Beatle Years, ABC Radio's Beatle Archives, The Breakfast with the Beatles programs from New York to Los Angeles, and Joe Johnson's Beatle Brunch.
Lots of Beatles in there.
Absolutely. Patterson then released his second work, Hellhounds on Their Trail. In this work, Patterson continued with his popular theme of rock and roll's enduring myths and legends. Patterson's third book was released by Simon & Schuster's Fireside Books on July 13th, 2004. It is called Take a Walk on the Dark Side, Rock and Roll Myths, Legends, and Curses, which we're going to be talking about.
That's right up our alley.
That's right. Fits right in with what we do here on the TV. I almost said TV show.
We hope to have a TV show.
Someday.
Well, we're pretty ugly.
They don't really want to see us on TV, but anyway, Patterson's radio appearances continue to grow beyond the Beatles shows, and he enjoys being a guest on Coast to Coast AM, which is a great show.
Terrific show.
Gary also continues to be a consultant for many of rock radio's premier stations nationwide and spends some of his time lecturing on college campuses.
We're very lucky to have him. That's basically it in a nutshell.
That's very true. So without further ado, we're going to bring Gary Patterson on the line with us. Hello, Mr. Patterson. Are you there, sir?
I'm right here.
All right.
How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Outstanding. And you're in Tennessee?
Yes, I am.
As given away by your accent.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, well, I didn't think I had that much of a accent, but I guess I do.
Well, when you live in Rhode Island, you pretty much...
Yeah, it all stands out, doesn't it?
I'm pretty sure we sound funny to you, I'm sure.
No, we're pretty, we're non-specific with our accent.
Yeah, we've been around. Actually, that ties right in with what I want to mention. I was very good friends with a native Tennessean when I was in the service for 4 years, and he was a very good friend of mine, roommate of mine. He was actually from Memphis. I don't know how far you are from Memphis, but he was a great individual.
Great.
We have a lot of great people in Tennessee, from Memphis to Knoxville and all points in between, I guess.
All right, so I think, Gary, what we want to first start talking about, I'd like to get into the Paul McCartney death hoax clues, whatever you like to call it. We'd like to get into that story first, if we could.
Right, a lot of people are vaguely familiar with the whole Paul McCartney is dead controversy, but probably more so folks who were alive at the time, and the younger generation might not be very aware of really what was taking place back in the late 60s, early 70s with that entire deal. Is there any possible way you could give us a concise kind of Cliff Note version of what was going on then with Paul McCartney?
Well, let me just say, first of all, I knew that when I saw your guys' show, the Dark Sider radio, it had to be made for me as a guest.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're very
welcome to Dark Side a lot, let me tell you.
That's great to hear, and your works are right up our alley, and we both enjoy rock music, and we really like the paranormal and the occult and all that good stuff, so there you are.
Yeah, we're going to have a great time.
Great.
Let me do the Cliff Note version. First of all, a lot of people would hear this today and they think, this thing is totally ridiculous. It's crazy. It couldn't happen. But you got to remember, it happened in '69 was when the rumors came out. And in the 60s was a turbulent decade. I mean, first of all, John Kennedy was assassinated, and you had Robert Kennedy assassinated. You had Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. You had the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The government was not considered to be your friend, and they weren't very warm and cozy.
Mm-hmm. And they still aren't.
Yeah, well, back then, you were talking about a lot of deaths and murders that were supposedly, associated with intergovernment things. And I mean, it was very believable. I mean, that's why it probably hit at the perfect time. The other reason is that the Beatles stopped performing live in 1966, and the music changed. When you listen to, Rubber Soul had a hint, but when Revolver came out, that album was completely different. It was
right.
Revolutionary. And then in '67, when Sgt. Pepper's came out, everything changed. I mean, the whole structure of the music, and of course I know that Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys was a great inspiration of McCartney, but when Sgt. Pepper's came out, they looked different. They had facial hair. I mean, the music was different. A lot of people kept saying, something's wrong with the Beatles. And then this rumor came out that McCartney had been killed in a car accident in '66, and the other three Beatles were forced by their management and the labels to bring in an imposter. And when the imposter came in, the other three Beatles tried to get messages to their fans that this guy was really not Paul McCartney. And then you have this strange mythology of album art and songs that started, with me, it started with Sgt. Pepper's and worked its way up through Abbey Road. But some people, they tended to go back much further than this. But I try to keep the time frame. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that when it was all put together, and the changing of the music and the changing of the styles, and the Beatles sort of destroyed themselves, because after Sgt. Pepper's, they were criticized for not taking music even further, but what more can you do?
Right.
They go back to the White Album, and that's, guitars, bass, and drums, and then, of course, Abbey Road was brilliant, and the Let It Be album that was specterized, I guess, by Phil, but, when you take a look at the work they did, I mean, their creative energy sort of destroyed the band itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty much a case where the Beatles' career as a group was kind of split in half, and you have the first years, the early years, and even when you buy the Beatles albums to this day, when you buy Greatest Hits, there's actually two packages of Greatest Hits. You can buy the regular Beatles and the Beatles remix, pretty much.
Well, exactly, and look, September 9, 2009, everything comes out again, all remastered.
That's right.
And why would they do 999?
Well, that's part. Yeah, we're going to get into a little bit of that.
You know what's a quick number 9 story.
This is actually a really funny story,
if I may. When a friend of mine, when I was a youngster, actually I think like 5th or 6th grade, going back many years ago. A friend of mine, his name was Keith Garno. Actually, I don't know where he is.
Hopefully he's listening.
I haven't seen him in many years, but he was way ahead of his time in terms of his like for music and what he was into. And he really, really got me into the Beatles. And he used to talk about the Beatles' death clues back then, as well as of course the Elvis conspiracy of him being alive and all that stuff. But it even got to the point where we used to listen to Revolution Number 9, and in school, every time the teacher, if she was going down the list of answers to a test or something and said number 9, then the kids in the class would start making noise and coughing.
Yes, drawing attention to the number.
And it actually spread like a virus. It went through the entire school.
And I went to the same school, and we were in different classes, but I remember whenever there was some sort of numerical countdown, whenever we'd get to number 9, all the kids would start to go, and pretty soon the teachers were all aware of what we were doing. Yes. They didn't know why we were doing it, but I don't even know why. The kids knew why they were doing it. But
so as 12-year-old boys, we would sit around listening to old Beatles records and trying to pick out some of the supposed clues that were on the album cover. So maybe we can talk specifically about, especially Sgt. Pepper's, because I think that's the one that draws the most attention in terms of the clues on the cover. If we could talk a little bit about that and some of the clues on that cover.
Well, see, I think Sgt. Pepper's is the smoking gun.
Right.
Because if you take a look at the whole phenomena, you know, you're going to have evenly divided camps. I mean, there are people who are convinced that Paul McCartney died in 1966, and he was replaced with this imposter, who in '69 the name was given as William Campbell from Canada, or Billy Shears.
Right.
And I mean, a lot of the publications that came out at the time even had a chronology for where Billy Shears lived. His father's name was Philip Shears, so he lived in Chelsea in England. And
wow.
I mean, the whole thing was crazy. But you have to take a look at that and say, you know, if McCartney died in '66, probably his greatest song was Yesterday.
Right.
Well, the guy who was the imposter, who came out with Sgt. Pepper,
he was pretty good.
Pretty great songs, didn't he? I mean, think of all the hits he had. Obviously, he was creatively much better than the original McCartney.
Not only did he look like him, but he was more talented, right?
He much more talented. I mean, my gosh, and look at the songs he came out with, the whole second side of Abbey Road and the others. But so you have that idea. And then the second concept is that it was all just public hysteria. And, you know, I think the clues are divided in three categories. You know, first of all, it's what I call is just a totally ridiculous. It's where you take anything and you try to make it fit, like a sledgehammer knocking in a round peg in a square hole. After a while, if you hit it hard enough, it seems, okay, Paul didn't have a hat on the Help album.
Right.
And a lot of people, most of the clues are like that. But the third category, well, the next category, I should say, second, is guided looking, guided listening. If you look at the Sgt. Pepper cover, does the word Paul really appear in those yellow hyacinth flowers with the three black strings? Do the three black strings actually represent the three surviving Beatles? If you listen to Strawberry Fields Forever at the end, does he really say, I buried Paul, or cranberry sauce? And what always got me was that the Beatle management said, we were in the studio, and John didn't say, I buried Paul. He said, I'm very bored. Now, what was interesting to me was Lennon said, he said, no, I said cranberry sauce. So
right.
You have, you know, three people, so that's guided listening. But the others that fascinated me and made me write the book had to be the smoking gun, that the Beatles had actually planned to do this. And I think they did.
Right.
And I guess that makes me different. But, you know, McCartney's been on television a lot. He was on David Letterman. He keeps talking about, yeah, well, you know, I didn't have my shoes on when I had the Abbey Road picture, so it was supposed to be some mafia sign of death, or my ears weren't the same. People looked at me strange. And,
right.
You know, I just kicked my sandals off. So he is always interesting on the Abbey Road album. I'd like to ask him the question about the Sgt. Pepper cover.
Right.
I'd like to hear him address that, because once I did the book, ABC did an interview with McCartney, and they were talking about the Free as a Bird video. Now, you guys know that in the Free as a Bird video, there's over 90 references to Beatles songs they hid in the video.
Right.
And when they asked McCartney about it, he says, well, it became a bit of a game in the old Beatle days to put little hidden things in. So he admitted putting little hidden things in. And McCartney's had fun with this, because he had the album Paul is Live, when he's walking across Abbey Road again, leading Arrow, his son Sheepdog. He on The Simpsons, he has a backward track on Maybe I'm Amazed, where he gives a ripping recipe for lentil soup, and at the end he says, oh, by the way, I'm alive. So, I mean, he's having he probably has a good time with that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think, I'm sure you're probably going to get to this, but I think one of the more startling clues, obviously you can read into a lot of the stuff on the cover, like you said, interpret it as you will, but the whole mirror thing up to the album cover is very interesting. If you could talk about that.
Well, I think that's the smoking gun.
Right.
And I don't think that anyone could say that was a coincidence. And the reason why, if you know the history of the Sgt. Pepper cover, was that the album was designed by Peter Blake, but the only artistic work on the album cover that wasn't designed by Blake was the bass drum skin, and it was designed by Joe Epgrave. And you take the word ep and grave, it sounds suspiciously like epitaph and grave. And if you look at the cover, there was always the rumor that the word Beatles was on a freshly dug grave, and the figures behind the bass drum were the mourners at the funeral. And there was an open hand over Paul's head.
Right.
Now, Life magazine said, well, the open hand was a symbol of a Far Eastern death clue. Now, that may be totally ridiculous, but at least a hand is over his head. He's picked out of the group. But if you look in the crowd, you'll see Lewis Carroll. And Lewis Carroll wrote Alice's Adventures Through the Looking Glass. So what you do is you take a straight-edge mirror, and if you have your CD or your album at home, try this. Take the straight-edge mirror, put it in the center of Lonely Hearts so that you can read the reflectant with the album cover in the mirror, and go from left to right, and it spells numeral 1, O-N-E, which is 1 again, and then you have numeral I-X, which is 9, and then it says he die. And between he and die is a diamond-shaped arrow that perfectly points up to Paul McCartney and down to the grave.
Right.
And that's
So
basically giving you the date, too.
Yeah, because on a tombstone, a tombstone's purpose is to tell who died and the date of his death. Well, if the arrow points up to McCartney, that settles the first question. And 119, now I had heard later after I did this that some people interpreted it as 111, cross out the fourth one, he died. But see, that doesn't really make sense because you have to have a date of death. So what you have is 1-1 becomes 11 and then 9. That would be November the 9th. Now, why it's November the 9th and not September 11th? I guess today, September 11th, would be more ominous, wouldn't it? But
or January 9th.
Take a look at November 9th. What really intrigued me was there's 3 Beatle references about a car accident Paul McCartney had on November 9th, 1966. So you do have a date of the accident, and the story goes that that he was not hurt, but the accident occurred at 5 o'clock in the morning after leaving Abbey Road Studios. So if you look on a calendar to 1966, November the 9th would be a Wednesday. When you turn the album cover over in the back, the album cover is blood red, and George is pointing to the first line of the song, She's Leaving Home, and the first line says, Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock as the day begins. And, of course, Paul has his back to the camera. So the question is, whoever came up with the phrase Lonely Hearts, and there were 2 drum skins designed for the cover, and the only similarity in both drum skins is the way Lonely Hearts was written in the exact font. Everything else was different. So it was key to give the clue. So the whole history of the Beatles on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, that phrase was to give a Paul is dead clue. So the question is, why did the Beatles do this?
They put an awful lot of time into it, and as you said before, there's a lot of characters on the cover, and a lot of them have significance. So,
they do, yeah.
So the music's telling us we're going to go to a break, but Gary, you can hold on through the break. Is that right?
Sure. That's great, guys.
All right. Well, stay tuned. We're going to get more into the Beatles.
Welcome back to The Darker Side with Mike and Jay. Our special guest tonight is R. Gary Patterson, author, rock and roll historian, all-around great guy.
And probably a good bowler, I imagine.
I'm sure that he is. If you have a question for Gary, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't mind taking a question from some of the listeners. The numbers here are 766-1380, 769-0600. If you're outside the area, you can call 1-800-949-9674. Gary, still with us?
I'm right here.
How you doing? As we just came in from the break, obviously Strawberry Fields Forever was one of the bumper songs coming in. If I might ask you about that song specifically, a couple things about it. I heard a while ago that, and maybe you can shed some light on this, that it was, when you listen to that song, John Lennon sounds awfully different than in some of his other songs that he sings. And there was an interview with George Martin where he said that they actually slowed down the vocal track to bring down his vocals a notch. You know if that's true or not?
Well, I know that the original track was recorded at 2 speeds.
Ah, okay.
So one of the tapes was faster, and George Martin, who was a genius, I mean,
right.
If anybody should be the 5th Beatle, I don't know if the Beatles would have ever had the success with any other producer and an engineer than George Martin and Jeff Emmerich. But he had to. Lennon liked both takes. One was faster, one was slower. So what Martin had to do was slow the tape down, speed it up, and just run it. So yeah, you're right. And a lot of times when you slow a tape down, it's easier on the vocal, or if you have to hit a higher part, you speed the tape up. It makes you hit the higher part without straining your voice. But yeah, it was 2 tape speeds that George Martin had to work to get the thing exactly right for Lennon.
I actually have some sound editing software that I've been messing with a little bit recently, and I took that song because for years and years I was totally convinced that at the end of the song he says, "I buried Paul." Right. I'd listen to it, in the normal, album or CD, and that's what it sounded like to me. But I kind of separated the vocals a little bit recently, and now I'm 100% convinced that he does say cranberry sauce. Now I don't know what your opinion is on that, how you interpret it, but I I'm pretty sure that's what he says.
Well, I am too. But what's the funny part is
Yep.
if we did an experiment with your listeners,
Mhm.
I could say, okay, I want you to listen because he says I buried Paul.
Yep.
And we'd play it a few times and everybody would hear it.
Yep.
And I'd say, no, I want you to listen again. Now he says cranberry sauce.
Right.
And everybody would hear cranberry sauce. And
Right.
if I said, listen a third time, he's really saying I'm very bored. And, I think it's the power of suggestion, which is one of the things with a lot of backward tracks. But you got to remember, the Beatles had the very first backward vocal track on Rain. And on the third vocal, when Lennon sang it, it sounded like he's chanting, but actually all he's saying was when the rain comes, they run and hide their heads. So, they were fascinated with the technology of the sound of backward tracks. Like, for instance, with cymbals, where it would go like that.
Yep.
You can hear it all through Strawberry Fields Forever.
Right. And that's a cymbal crash coming in backwards? Is that what you're saying?
Right, that's what it is.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's cool.
So it's obvious that even if the Beatles originally didn't plan for the controversy to get as large as it did, once it got rolling, they're not going to stop it because they're selling records.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. Here's a theory. You tell me what you guys think about this.
Mhm.
How revolutionary was Sgt. Pepper's for the Beatles?
Well, it's the first generally accepted first concept album, correct?
That's correct. But the other thing is, was it a gamble for the Beatles to do this?
It's a departure from their normal from what they had
Exactly.
done up to that point.
Exactly. I mean, this was a gamble to go into this concept thing with a band and everything else because, a lot of the fans at that time, they were thinking the music was changing too radically. So let's say that maybe the Beatles had a little insurance policy. Let's say if the album didn't sell, that, oh my gosh, there's clues that Paul is dead.
Mhm.
People would go out and buy the album to see if they could find the clues. I mean,
That's a way to
think
look at it,
about
right?
Well, it makes sense that it's such a gamble because you had the really big clues on Sgt. Pepper's, and of course Magical Mystery Tour had some clues that maybe weren't as dominant.
Mhm.
I mean, people believe them very, very seriously, like the walrus symbol. I remember that when it came out, there was a rumor the walrus or the word walrus was Greek for corpse, which wasn't true, but it didn't matter if it was true. People accepted
Right.
it, and it became part of the mythology. But, the Beatles sort of backed out a little bit. No album really had as many great clues as Sgt. Pepper's.
Mhm.
But then again, when the White Album came out and Glass Onion, when John Lennon sang, "Here's another clue for you all," the walrus was Paul.
Right.
In 1968, it's kind of like they were maybe disappointed nobody found these clues.
Mm-hmm.
A year or so later. And of course, when he mentions another clue, it implies there were others before. So, then the rumors hit in 69, and then everybody was really into it, and the Beatles denied everything. But
Right.
if you also remember in 69 of August, which was a few months before October 12th, when the clues broke with Russ Gibb, there was also a murder in California by the Manson family in which Beatle lyrics were written in blood all over the wall.
Right.
Charles Manson was hearing secret messages from the White Album. So what if Lennon and McCartney were summoned to California and they asked them if they put hidden messages in their songs that might, control people's unconscious thoughts?
Well, they wouldn't want to be connected with anything like that at that point.
Never. And I think the best thing for them to do was just be quiet and let it ride out. And of course, in '69, they weren't very friendly anyway.
Right.
So it was they were breaking up. But it still didn't stop Lennon for singing "How Do You Sleep" when he said "Those freaks was right" when they said you was dead.
Right.
And then when Ringo did Back Off Boogaloo, Philip Norman said that Boogaloo was a code name the other three Beatles had for McCartney. And there's a line where Ringo says, "Wake up, meathead, don't forget that you were dead." So, you take a look at this, somebody pretty well knew about it.
Right.
And but it's kind of interesting, the whole thing is. And maybe we'll never know the truth, and maybe that's how a great urban legend should be, that
Right.
it's never really told.
Well, Gary, my question would be too: what would be the reason why the Beatles? Let's put aside all this for just a minute. What's the reason why the Beatles stopped touring?
Well, I don't think it was fun. If you remember their last tour when they went to the Philippines,
Mhm.
and they went to the Philippines and they snubbed the Marcus family, and Lennon turns on the television set and he sees Imelda Marcus, all these crying little Filipino children, and they were talking about how the Beatles had snubbed them.
They wanted to kill him, I think.
Yeah, the Philippine army was coming after them, and
Yeah.
they were trying to run to get on the airplane.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, and McCartney outran everybody to get on the plane, and so he wasn't dead at that time. And John tripped, and when John tripped, Alf Becknell, their chauffeur, threw his body in front of John, and he was beaten severely. And
Wow.
when they got on the plane still couldn't leave, and they announced for Mal Evans and Brian Epstein to come off the plane. And when they came off the plane, they had to give the government all the money from the show.
Wow.
And when they got on the plane to fly out, George Harrison looked at the others and he said, it's not fun being a Beatle anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to remember when they did The Beatles Are More Popular Than Jesus Christ.
Right.
With Lennon, I think it was in Memphis, which is kind of interesting, but there was a report that he'd been he was subject to be assassinated at 9 o'clock, and that's what bothered Lennon, because it was at 9. And when they were performing, firecrackers went off, and now you're all looking to see who was shot.
Right.
So it wasn't fun.
Right.
And they thought they'd channel all their interest in, being creative and being the greatest band in the world and taking music to a different direction, which they did. And they never played. Of course, there were rumors that they were going to get back together. And,
right.
Of course, they did play on the rooftop of Apple, But
Actually, I did want to mention that. With YouTube and a lot of these other video sharing websites, you can see a lot of these really obscure Beatles videos that you'd probably never get to see. And I've, while researching this in the past few weeks, I must say that the performance on the rooftop of Abbey Road Apple, what was it? Apple Studio Records, right? Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They probably one of the most intriguing performances, really, because I think it was one of their last performances together in public, I believe. Was it not, or was there anything else after that?
That was it.
Yeah.
And, the story goes that when Clapton got married,
Mm-hmm.
that they, at his wedding with Patty Harrison in London, that the Beatles were going to perform, and that John Lennon didn't show up. But of course, George was there, and Paul was there, and Ringo was there.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Live Aid came out, if you remember, Dick Clark was saying, nobody leave, because this is going to be a historic moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then McCartney came out and played, and the story goes that it was supposed to be McCartney, Harrison, and Ringo were going to play together at the end of Live Aid. But George was afraid he may be shot, and Ringo wasn't confident about his drumming, so they backed out at the last moment. McCartney went out and performed. So
Wow.
I guess it's kind of sad, but you got to also remember, guys, that they were offered $500 million to recreate the Shea Stadium show for 30 minutes, and they turned it down when the anthology came out. And George said, "We can't be the Beatles as long as John is dead."
Right.
That's a lot of people would point to that as a sign of integrity and say money doesn't mean that much to me. I'd rather have people remember how we were rather than hear a watered down version.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how I feel. And how many bands would do that today?
Not too many, that's for sure.
I would say none.
I would say New Kids on the Block would probably crawl to get there.
For $500 million, I'll go out there and I'll sing Beatles songs. It won't be anywhere near as good.
Of course,
maybe
they won't.
we three could do it. That would be interesting. Yeah.
That would be good. Of course, we probably wouldn't have much of an audience.
No.
If we did, they'd run.
Well, I know, Gary, we wanted to kind of get into a couple of different topics with you today, if that's okay. And I know that the Beatles was the focus of your book, The Walrus Was Paul, which is a great book, by the way. And what I really enjoyed about it, real quickly, is that you really entertain all of the theories, and you don't speak poorly about them, because some people really hold on to those beliefs. And, you explain in detail what the belief is and what, where it comes from, and not really passing judgment, which I kind of appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that too, because for me, I love the story. I love the legend, and I'm not the kind of person, who just wants it to blow up. I mean, I'll lead you to three different positions that you can make up your own opinion. But I have friends, like I said, who really believe that this imposter theory is real. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's no use arguing with them. I'll listen and I'll smile. But I mean, that's the purpose of great literature, and the purpose of the role of myth. Let it live forever. A new generation growing up will hear these clues, and it will really matter to them when they get to explore the greatest music by the greatest rock band in the world.
I think just the last comment I have about the Beatles, if I may, it seems like there were a lot of things that kind of fell into place to allow that group to perpetuate the way that it did. Obviously with the the passing of Stuart Sutcliffe early on, and then changing from Pete Best to Ringo Starr, and like you said, without George Martin, they probably wouldn't have been the band that they were. It's funny, after they broke up, I mean, some of the Beatles obviously had some hits, and Paul McCartney continues to this day, but they never really could recreate that magic that they had as a band together.
And you're right, because what it is chemistry. Because even if there was ego issues between John and Paul, they needed each other.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were brilliant writers, but they never had the magic apart that they had together. And I think that's a lesson for a lot of great rock bands.
Yep.
Once you have chemistry, don't mess with your chemistry.
That's right.
Keep it going.
So I think we're going to get on to some more rock and roll myths and legends if we could. And I think one of the prevailing ideas and theories is that for some reason rock stars can't die. Even when they do die, they're always alive. I mean, can you explain that phenomenon to us, if in your own words and opinion, please?
Well, I think it goes back to ancient history. I think it goes back to the ancient Greeks. If you remember in the Iliad and the Odyssey, when a great hero died, he became immortal. You know, he went up to Mount Olympus. He was half god. And I think the one thing that keeps it alive is that when you listen to the music on your radio every day, they're still with you. You know, it's not like you just forget about them. I mean, the music lives on. As long as the music lives on, they live on. All those emotions that were shared with it, it lives on. And, you know, just the idea, I mean, I was on Coast to Coast with Ian, and they were talking about Michael Jackson. And I said, I'll make a prophecy real quick when he died. I said, I guarantee you that, number one, there'll be a theory that he faked his death. And number two, the next camp will say that he was murdered. And I said, this will all happen within 2 weeks.
And look what happened, right?
Yeah, because it follows the pattern. It follows the pattern.
Yeah, I think most people thought he was going to come out of that coffin at the memorial and start doing the moonwalk across the stand, across the stage.
But what was funny, now they're saying his body wasn't even in the coffin. You know, so
and that's like the Elvis myth.
Well, where was he? Where is he? Is he in Barry Gordy's crypt, you know, in California? So, you know, the whole thing happens like that. You know, he's going to make millions because, you know, he faked his death, so all those concerts, you know, they had him insured. And then the idea that, well, no, he was murdered because, you know, for the insurance policies. And whoever it is, guys, it's going to follow that pattern because that's the basis of myth. Well, and that's how it works.
Well, that brings us right to obviously the largest you know, conspiracy in terms of faking their death, of course, would be Elvis Presley, the story of Elvis Presley. And going back to when I was a kid, my friend Keith and I.
Keith, we're going back to Keith already.
Yeah, we did a presentation in 6th grade. I don't remember why we did this, but we did a presentation of Elvis Presley. We gave to the class all the different clues that would prove that he was alive. From obviously him not being in the coffin, like you said, like it was a wax dummy, and all the different Elvis is alive theories. And of course, nobody in the class was convinced in any way.
And everyone thought you had spent way too much time on that.
That is correct. So maybe you can talk just briefly about some of the, you know, the myths surrounding Elvis and his death, and is he alive or is he dead?
Well, you know, in 1977, when all this came out, there were a few books that were rather sensational. One included a cassette tape, supposedly of Elvis calling the author, and the tape was made, you know, with referencing points that Elvis couldn't have known, since he died in 77, so he had to be alive. And of course, then they found out that this was done for an Elvis fan magazine. And you know, the first thing with Elvis's death, if I remember, in 1978, the famous pool house picture came out, where someone had taken a picture in a pool house and it looked like Elvis was sitting there with his glasses, and that came out. And then the next year in 79, Geraldo had a show called the Elvis Cover-Up.
The great
Well,
Geraldo.
if Geraldo's involved, then that's got to be true.
You know it has to be true. And so then is Elvis alive? The great clues came out, conspiracies. And, you know, you have people who do not want to let go. And, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, when John Lennon died, I was devastated because I grew up with the Beatles. I didn't know Lennon. But I felt like he was a childhood friend because his music had meant so much to me. And it took me a week to get over it. You know, I mean, I couldn't even listen to Beatles songs. I mean, it was really emotional for me. And I know that a lot of people who grew up with Elvis had the same thing. And, you know, they have this vigil at Graceland, you know, in Memphis. But a lot of the clues that came out originally have pretty well been disproven. And you know, like the bit about the heavy coffin with the air conditioner. You know, I mean, this coffin was, you know, is made out of, I think it was copper. And the thing weighed 800 pounds.
And plus, Elvis was a big man at the time, too.
Yeah, he was. And, you know, the wax dummy thing, you know, first of all, if the wax dummy was melting in a coffin, I mean, what the temperature does wax melt? It has to be over 150 degrees. I don't think it was hot in Graceland. And the reason I really know is I was good friends with Carl Perkins. And I got to meet Carl before he died. And so here I am in Nashville, and I was with Carl, and I think it was in 1996 and 97, and I asked him, I said, Carl, you went to the funeral of Elvis. Is he really dead? And he says, Gary, Elvis is dead. I'm there. So when he told me that, I mean, I was pretty well over it. And the bit about the life insurance policy, one of those is being cashed in now. So, basically the thing about fraud, Elvis appearings all over the country, DNA. I mean, first of all, if someone has DNA, I mean, you have to have a chain of custody where this comes from. I mean, you could give DNA and it could be Elvis, but how do you know it's actually from Elvis Presley? So, it's still going to be in the news, but I don't think it's as big a story. I went out to L.A. to film a documentary on Elvis, and it was supposed to be Elvis is Alive, so I sort of gave a different view of it. And
they weren't happy to hear from you.
Yeah, it was a lot of misinformation, like Elvis and his mother died at the same age. That's not true.
Right.
But it's the part of myth where everything's accepted.
Well, it's not like Elvis was the picture of good health at the time either. He was obviously well overweight, on a lot of different drugs, and actually he couldn't even, watching some of his videos, he couldn't even remember the words to some of his songs, and he'd sweat profusely on stage. So obviously it's not out of the realm of possibility that his heart exploded.
Well, but
it makes a great story, and it's a great legend, and when a younger generation comes up and they pick up on it, it's a great way to get introduced to the music and the culture of it.
Great. Well, the music means we're going another break, and stay tuned with R. Gary Patterson. We're going to get into Robert Johnson and the Crossroads, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to The Darker Side with Mike and Jay. Tonight we're talking to R. Gary Patterson. We're talking a little bit about the Beatles, Elvis, some other rock and roll myths and legends. Gary, I think the last thing I want to ask you about Elvis is the singer Orion or Orion, or however you want to pronounce it. We used to listen to those albums trying to figure out if that was actually Elvis reincarnated.
Well, it was a good angle, I mean, the book came out, an album was released with him. He had this secret mask, but he played one show, took the mask off, and stepped down.
Right.
And admitted he wasn't Elvis. And I think the man was killed violently. I think he was shot, and I think he maybe is in Alabama. I can check on that for you. But
now, who was he? Was he just an Elvis impersonator trying to cash in?
Elvis impersonator.
Okay, right.
And he sounded very, very much like Elvis.
Okay.
Well, Gary, one of the questions we wanted to ask you about was one that we find very interesting here in the program, just because we normally deal with paranormal events and things of that sort. And that's about Robert Johnson, which a lot of folks nowadays don't know who that is. But basically, he's referred to as the grandfather of rock and roll. Is that right?
Well, that's true. If you ask Eric Clapton or Keith Richards or especially Jimmy Page, they will tell you that Robert Johnson was the originator with his unique style of playing.
Right.
And from the Mississippi Delta, because that's where it all began. And but he's got a great story, because you just can't be a great player. If you're very good, then you got to have a little supernatural help.
Right.
Whether you're Paganini, the great violinist, who had to bring a note from his mother when he went into Nice in France saying the devil wasn't his father. So, I mean, it's not the first time it's happened with a musician, but Robert Johnson supposedly made a pact with the devil at Highway 61 and Highway 49, right outside Clarksdale, Mississippi. And the legend was that if a blues man took his guitar and he waited at midnight and he played a few good licks on his guitar, that he would feel this presence behind him, but he dared not look. And it would be this huge black man who would reach for his guitar. And you would hand the guitar to him, and you would hear the guitar tuned to a very special tuning. And once the tuning stopped and the guitar was passed over your shoulder, if you took the guitar back, then you had made your pact with the devil. And you'd be given the power to play the blues, to win women, to gain fame.
I needed the win women part.
I like that.
I could have used that when I was a teenager.
At Crossroads in Rhode Island.
That actually, according to legend, is correct me if I'm wrong, but that's from the voodoo legend by a deity by the name of Papa Legba, who actually would be the see that we do some research on the show. We're not as dumb as we look. But so Robert Johnson supposedly, and I think most of this took place because just a year before Robert Johnson became somewhat locally famous in the Delta for playing outstanding guitar and blues guitar and all of that, he was a terrible musician. Is that correct?
He was terrible. And when he would play, the old blues guys would dodge him. People like Son House, and Charlie Patton. They didn't want to play with this kid. so he disappears for a while. He goes looking for his father. And when he came back, when they finally heard him play, he was so incredible. In such a short amount of time, Son House turned to the others and he said, he sold his soul to play like that. And then the legend started. So when he played the juke joints, people had heard the story of Robert Johnson. They'd walk in, and he'd be playing, and he had a cataract in one of his eyes. And the light would hit his eye, and it made his eye glow, and they thought,
that's pretty creepy right there.
It's creepy. And then when he'd play certain passages, he'd turn his back to the audience so they couldn't see what he was doing. They couldn't figure out his licks and his tunings. And then one night, he was given a poisoned bottle of whiskey that he unfortunately drank, and it took him 3 days to die. And the legend says he died on his hands and knees howling like a dog. And that ended Robert Johnson's life. I think that a lot of the great British players were introduced to his music because of the legend.
Right.
And they said, I got to hear this music.
And he
listen, yeah.
Oh, he never denied that. As a matter of fact, isn't it correct? He actually said a few times that he did sell his soul to the devil to be able to play that way.
Well, actually, he said that the devil taught him to play in graveyards at night. And
wow.
So, this man who was from Alabama, his name was Ike Zinneman, which is not exactly your standard blues name, Ike Zinneman, not like, Blind Lemon Jefferson.
Right.
But he was he said he claimed to be the devil, and he taught Johnson how to play in cemeteries. But, I'm not sure that Johnson ever confirmed or even denied that he had sold his soul to the devil. I know that it goes back to Tommy Johnson, who was another blues player who claimed that he had made a pact with the devil. There's no relation to Robert. But the story brings in the occult with rock and roll, because when Johnson died at 27, over 42 rock stars died at the age of 27.
Right, that's the next point we were going to get to was the 27 Club, so to speak, and Robert Johnson was really the first recognized member of that club. Is that right?
Well, yeah, he was the first person who had a major influence on rock and roll to die at 27. And when you take a look at it, you say, well, how many rock stars were there? So at first when I wrote the book, I was amazed when I was researching some of these artists. I thought, okay, Robert Johnson died at 27. Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones died at 27. Jimi Hendrix died at 27. Janis Joplin died 2 weeks later at 27. Jim Morrison died at 27. I thought, oh my gosh.
That's pretty coincidental.
Big Ben from the Grateful Dead died at 27. Blind Al Wilson from Can't Eat died at 27. Pete Ham from Badfinger died at 27. Even Kurt Cobain died at 27. I remember his mother when Cobain died, and she said, now he's gone and joined that stupid club. I told him not to join that stupid club.
Now, what do you think the significance of that number is in terms of any kind of occult or maybe even a paranormal event or phenomenon? Or is it just a coincidence? What do you think?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I did a show. It still comes on. If you guys watch E, there's a show I was involved with called Doomed to Die, 13 Curses. And one of the 13 curses is rock stars who die at the age of 27. And I had Glennis McCants come on, who's a numerologist, and she was talking about 2 + 7 = 9. And a 9 is a number of power. And that if you die with a spiritual number of 9, then you've done about everything you can do in this life. And, it's kind of interesting, because you also have the number 2, the number 7, so it has a numerological thing about people who are escapists who search for love, and they may be involved with drugs. And you have 2 + 7, of course, is 9, where you have 9 months that a baby goes full term before it's born. And in astrology, they say that 27 is a year of cycles, that you enter from one cycle into another. So it's just really interesting. But once I'd brought it up before, and I started this thing about the 27 Club or 27, I got an email from a guy who was going for a doctorate, and he was in statistics, and he said, I added all the ages of all rock stars who died from Richie Valens at 17 all the way up. 42 rock stars died at the age of 27. It's the number 1 death of rock stars at that age.
Oh.
And I read an article with John Mayer, and they asked him, they said, well, what do you think your greatest accomplishment is? And he said, well, I made it past 27. So
wow.
it's in there. They sort of think about it.
I wonder how much of this, how much of their lifestyle plays into that. I mean, and if you factor in that most people are not famous musicians at the age of 19, and it takes them a few years to build up their career, and really the age of 27, mid-30s, that's really the prime of many rock stars' careers. Yeah,
and see what I would think, if I'd said a vast majority of rock stars die under the age of 30, that would have been good. I mean, that would have been very explainable. But the exact age of 27, and you got to remember, when I did this, I didn't add people who were close to 27. I wasn't pushing it like the Paul is Dead clue, saying, well, he was in his 27th year of life.
Right.
Because then I could have added 5 other artists. But no, they had to be 27 when they died, and the list keeps going on. And whether it's bad karma or whether it's it's just one of the greatest coincidences. It's a terrible coincidence, but I know the rock stars have it in their mind now, because there's even, I think there's sites called the 27s now, where they're sort of grouped together because that was the age they died. And obviously John Mayer knows about it, and a lot of other artists, because they talk about maybe they're a little testy at the age of 27. So if you're a rock star and you're 27, stay out of small planes, watch your indulgence,
and get off the drugs,
and never
booze.
play your electric guitar in a bathtub. So stay out of that.
Now I got to ask you, one of the artists that you just mentioned, obviously the legendary Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
He's one that passed at the age of 27. Have you heard? Did you hear the interview recently with James Tappy Wright, who was a Jimi Hendrix roadie? He talks about how Jimi Hendrix, he knows firsthand that he was murdered. Did you?
Well, that's a story that's been around for a while, because Mike Jeffrey was Hendrix's manager, and there were some organized crime links. And I know that Hendrix was wanting to leave Jeffrey, and he really wanted Chaz Chandler back, but Chandler was considering it. And there's other things, like Hendrix had heroin placed in his suitcase by Jeffrey when he was going into Canada, so it was an idea that Jeffrey could get him. And people were saying that Hendrix was almost at a nervous breakdown when he was back in England.
Right.
And the idea that someone broke in and they gave him the sleeping pills and then poured so many bottles of wine down his throat to have him drowned. To me, that could be true. I think the other thing is that when his girlfriend, Monica Daneman, awoke, why did she call Eric Burden? Why did she leave the apartment, call Eric Burden, wait over 30 minutes before she called the ambulance?
Mm-hmm.
And, she always claimed that when the ambulance came, the ambulance drivers told her that Hendrix was alive, and that she was expecting him to be alive at the hospital, and then she waited, and she finally found he had died.
Right.
So, there's a story there. But, even Mike Jeffrey, to talk about how strange this is, the famous Hendrix groupies like Monica Daneman, after she did her book on Hendrix, she committed suicide. And she put a hose on the back of her Mercedes muffler and asphyxiated herself. Devon Wilson, who Hendrix had written Dolly Dagger for, took a swan dive off the Chelsea Hotel in New York and killed herself. And then Mike Jeffrey, the guy who's all of it, who was brought into a court to atone for his mismanagement, the plane he was flying in, I think it was from Spain, blew up, and he was killed.
Wow.
So, you talk about some bad vibes and some bad luck around the Hendrix estate. That was it.
Well, it just seems like you said before. It all goes back to the common theme around rock stars, and even when you have almost what you would consider a case closed, airtight, this is what happened, there are always going to be rumors that that's not what happened. The same can be said for Kurt Cobain, which to most people appears to be a straight suicide, but now you also have people saying, well, no, it was Courtney Love that did it, and so on and so forth. So
yeah, I've heard that the case is supposed to be reinvestigated. I know Ian Halpern, who's written 2 books on the subject, and he told me 2 years ago he was pretty well convinced they were going to reopen it. So, who knows? But, these people become legend. The music lives forever. They live forever. It's like Neil Young said, rust never sleeps, and it's better to burn out, than fade away.
Right.
So, that's what keeps their legend going.
Well, Gary, unfortunately, we're running out of time. Obviously, we only have an hour, so
this could be a 6 or 7 hours. I wish we had 5 hours a night like George does.
I know.
Well, I tell you, guys, I'd love to do your show anytime. I had a great time with you.
Outstanding. Well, if people want more information on you, Gary, and where can they get a hold of you, and what are you working on right now?
Well, you can get me at www.rgarypatterson.com, and you can keep up with me there on my appearances. And I've got a nice little photo section on Paul is Dead photos you guys would like to check out today.
That would be great.
I stuck that up just for you.
Oh, great.
I'm sure.
And no, really. And the other thing is that I'm trying to work on a couple of television projects. So I've been out to Hollywood working on a few things in development, and I'm still researching some more books and getting it together. I've got some great stories that are rather chilling. I guess my next one will probably be one of the scariest books I've ever written in rock and roll, so it's got some stories that you guys will love.
That's great. That sounds great.
Gary,
right up our alley, huh?
The last question I have, rock and roll related question, it's the biggest myth, legend, conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, that I can think of, is what does the R stand for in your name, R. Gary Patterson?
Well, that's kind of interesting. The reason I use the initial is because there is a famous painter whose name is Gary Patterson.
Ah.
And he does a lot of sports. He's great. I love his stuff. But, sometimes I get emails for him offering to pay me $20,000 to do a print.
And you say, okay, I'll do it.
I'd be glad to do it, but I think they got the wrong one, and I'm sure he gets a lot of interesting emails too on rock and roll myths and legends. So I have to differentiate myself from that. That's why the initial is there, but actually it stands for Rudolph and Rudy. So that's my first initial, but that's why the initial's on the website, because got to give him some peace and me too.
Well,
if anybody would like me to do a painting, I'd be glad to do it. 25,000, I can do a good one.
I'm sure you're talented.
I'm not going to lie to you, Gary. When I was emailing you the first time, I wrote the wrong name in the email window, and I emailed Gary Patterson, the painter, and he said, you got the wrong guy, and then I emailed you. So
I'm sure he's never heard that before.
No, but I'm sure it's kind of funny. I've not met him, but I'm sure we would have many great stories to tell each other.
All right, Gary. Well, listen, we really appreciate it. I mean, we're just a little production here, but we appreciate you taking the time for us and coming on and shedding some light on some of these myths and legends and taking the time with us today.
Hey, guys, I had a great time. Call me anytime. Let's do it again.
Thanks, Gary.
No problem. Take
All
care.
right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, our guest tonight was R. Gary Patterson. Certainly the hour flew.
Absolutely.
And definitely, I don't think anyone would have any more information on any of those subjects than that man.
No, and like you said, I think hopefully in the future we can have him again on at some point, and we can get into some of the more interesting myths of rock and roll. But if you want more information on R. Gary Patterson, you can reach him at rgarypatterson.com.
And you can reach, and actually our website is up and running.
It is.
You can view our beautiful faces at www.thedarkersideradio.com, and there you can also check out some other cool stuff. You can get a hold of us and check it out.
That's right. You can view some of our past shows. It's still kind of in construction form. We're looking at hopefully archiving our past shows on there as well at some point, so you can go right online and listen to them. So next week we'll be discussing another interesting and exciting, strange topic. But until next time, just remember, the truth exists. Believe it.